Hey, well, welcome back to another episode of 10 with Tom. It's episode number 8, and today we're talking... No. Hey, welcome back to another episode of 10 with Tom, where we explore faith 10 minutes at a time. It's episode 8, and today we're talking about talent, how we develop it, and what stops us from developing it. So we've been talking about this whole idea of talents, time, treasure, and talents. And I spoke on Sunday, if you missed the message, I spoke about the parable of the talents. That it's not so much about what talent we have, it's about how we use the talents that we have. But one of the kind of points that I think is so critical in the story is that the talents entrusted to the servants were never the servants, they belonged to the masters. And our gifts and our abilities, our talents per se, are really not ours. They're a gift from God, but they're a gift that we can use to give to other people. You know, we would never keep a gift to ourselves. And so if you've got the gift of encouraging, then it's only when you encourage others that that gift is expressed and actually multiplied. And so someone once said this, that your talent is God's gift to you, but what you do with it is your gift back to God. So I came across this really cool story about an anthropologist by the name of Margaret Mead, and she was a professor teaching, and at her class, a student once asked her, what do you look for? What are the first signs of civilization? And the student was, I guess, expecting her to say something about clay pots or arrowheads or whatever, but I love her response. She said, actually, the first sign of civilization in an ancient culture is a femur, which is a thigh bone. And the reality, she says, you know, in the animal kingdom, if an animal breaks its leg, it's going to die. It can't run away from predators, it can't get down to water, it can't look after itself, and so it dies. And she says that, you know, you're meat for prowling beasts. No animal survives a broken leg long enough for the bone to heal. And then she said this, she says, a broken femur that is healed is evidence that someone has taken time to be with the one who has fallen, has bound up the wound, has carried the person to safety, and has tended the person through recovery. Helping someone else through difficulty is where civilization starts. In other words, we're at our best when we serve others. That is what it means to be civilized. It's what separates us from the animal community, is when we actually use our talent, our time, our treasure, our abilities to serve those around us. So our talents are a gift from God, but how we use them for the benefit of others is our gift back to Him. But now I want to kind of go a little bit deeper, because I thought about, well, what stops us then from using our talents to serve other people? Or what stops us from developing our talents? Because like I said on Sunday, or you know, the parable, it's really not everyone has the same ability. You might have an ability I don't have, and I have an ability you don't. But what we all have the capacity or the ability is to develop the abilities or the talents that we do have. We can actually get better, we can improve, and the Bible speaks about that. But what stops us from developing our talents or growing our gifts? And I think there are two main things that I want to speak to you today about. The first is distraction, and the second is margin, or I should say the lack of margin in our lives. So I want to look at this first thing, distraction. I've been so impacted by this podcast that I listened to. Heather shared it with me, and I eventually bought the guy's book. It's called Stolen Focus, and he talks about how essentially there is a system at play in the world right now that wants to steal our focus, that actually monetizes our focus and our attention, and wants to keep us scrolling, wants to keep us, you know, engaged with their particular platform for as long as possible. And there's a phrase in the industry that kind of stood out to me, and it says this, that if it's enraging, it's engaging. Which is kind of scary. And basically they use the example, you know, if two people go to the same party, and on Monday, you know, after the party, the person A posts, what a great party, had so much fun, and person B posts, can't believe that, you know, so-and-so is such a, you know, a beep, and I'll never go thing, and these people are such gossip or whatever. Which post do you think the social media platform is going to push on the algorithm? Well, actually, it's this one, because this one gets more responses, more comments, more feedback, more, because if it's enraging, it's engaging. So now we're in the system where essentially these larger companies and these social media platforms don't really want to do what's best for us, but what they want to do is just keep us on as long as possible. And so we have this shouting at each other, no one's listening, we've got this polarization happening, and it's a real big problem. And I'm not one to say, like, throw away social media. Social media is an incredible tool for good, and I mean, ironically, you're probably watching this on social media, and hopefully it's helpful. We get to connect with one another, see friends, FaceTime with our family, all of that. But I do think we have to be careful about what we're consuming and what is taking our attention. I love this scripture from Philippians 4. Fix your thoughts on what is pure, true, right, honorable, and lovely. Fix your thoughts on those things. And I thought to myself, geez, do those words, pure, true, right, honorable, lovely, would those describe my consuming habits, what I'm watching, what I'm, kind of putting into my body? Often people will say, well, I don't have time. I want to develop this gift. I want to develop these skills, but I just don't have time. And then yet we'll go and binge 10 series of Netflix. And again, I'm not saying, we need our downtime, and I'm all for that. But if you do spend 1 hour a day on something for 5 years, you become an expert in that. That's just a 10,000 hour rule. And it's this sort of shift from saying, how long is this going to take, but rather, how far can I go with this? Because actually that's how we develop. And when we speak about distraction, often in nutrition they'll say we are what we eat. Well, I think that's true for our what we pay attention to. We are what we consume. We become what we fix our attention on. And so I think so often we're distracted. It's not that we don't have enough time. We do have enough time, but we're just distracted with all these other things that can steal our focus, steal our attention, and ultimately prevent us from developing the gifts and the abilities that God has given to us and that we can actually use to help and benefit others. So that's the first thing, distraction, that stops us. I think the second thing is just a lack of margin. And I'm not just talking about time here, I'm talking about margin. I was impacted by a friend of mine who's also a pastor, a preacher, and he spoke to me about this concept that's always stuck with me called the Plimsoll line. And if you look on a ship, there's like a circle with a line through the middle, and there's a whole bunch of different lines next to it. And that Plimsoll line shows the people, I don't know what you call Navy people, ship people. So that line shows how much you can load the ship. And if obviously you get to the line, that's the maximum load. But there are different lines that show different types of loading that the ship can take. If you want to sail across the Mediterranean, it's nice calm seas, well then you can actually load the ship a little bit more, and that line goes underwater because you're not going to get hit by some wave. But if you want to go across the Pacific, then you can't load it that much, because if a wave comes, it'll sail fine, but if a wave comes or the seas get choppy, it will tip the ship. And I realized that so often for me, that's kind of like I'm my own worst enemy, because I load the ship or my diary or my week with the maximum amount of things. Like I squeeze in everything I possibly can, take the kids to school, drop them off there, then go to work, then schedule that meeting, then straight after that meeting. And it looks fine and it works fine if nothing goes wrong. But how many of you know that life has a funny way of bringing a few choppy seas and waves that, suddenly we have to have a meeting we didn't expect, or there's a tragedy that's happened that we've got to respond to, or and we just haven't built that margin into our lives. And so that's my challenge to you also as we speak about developing our gifts. Maybe you want to write a book, or maybe you want to start a business, but it feels like you just don't have any margin. My encouragement is to build that in. I remember someone at the Global Leadership Summit talking about wedges, and how we've got to put time wedges in between our meetings and in between things, because that little 10-minute wedge before you go into a meeting helps you to think, well, what am I going to talk about in this meeting? How am I going to respond? What am I not going to say? How am I going to control my emotions? And then 10 minutes after the meeting gives us an opportunity to then kind of reflect on that meeting. Well, how did that go? How could I have done that better? Who do I need to say sorry for? Whatever. And I think that's such a helpful practice, is to put wedges in our scheduling, in our time. And then, of course, the practice of Sabbath, which the Bible speaks about. Not a rule, but a practice that I think creates huge amounts of space in our life. I've actually recently started, in light with kind of the distraction and the margin thing, I've started turning my phone into a dumb phone for Sabbath. So I kind of use my Friday afternoon to my Saturday afternoon as like my Sabbath, because obviously Sunday is a work day. And so what I do is I've got this focus mode, and you can do it. Most phones have it, digital well-being, go look at there. And you can actually turn off a whole bunch of apps and just have, so literally between Friday and Saturday, the only thing on my phone that works is messages and calls, and everything else. I can't go online, I can't go on social media. I even turned off WhatsApp. And I've only been doing it for a little while now, but it's amazing how much freedom and margin that's given me just to think and to be present. So that don't do what I do, but just take that principle and apply. How can I build margin into my life? Psalm 46 verse 10, be still and know. How often are we still and just listening for the voice of God? And then I love in Luke chapter 10 where Jesus says to Martha, Martha, you're worried about so many things. You're anxious and nervous and stressed out about so many things. And Mary has actually chosen the right thing. And Mary just chose to sit at Jesus' feet. And I don't think that's an excuse to, not do the dishes or whatever. But I think there is a point at which you've got to kind of just say, you know what? I'm just going to clear the decks. I've got too much stuff I'm worrying about, and I'm just going to create some space in my life, whatever that might look like, so that I can grow in my relationship with God, grow in my relationship with others, and grow in my gifts and abilities that God has entrusted to me. It's not my gift, it's His gift that I'm supposed to use for His glory. But sometimes we need to eliminate distraction and create margin to actually develop the talent that God has given to us. So I hope that's been helpful. Hope that's been practical. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of 10 with Tom, and we'll see you next time.